Family abandoned me after stepsister falsely accused me of cheating with her husband. Years later, I got an email. Looking back, I never saw it coming. It was just a normal day. I was chilling in my room after work, scrolling through my phone when I heard the front door slam. My stepsister Sarah stormed in like a hurricane. Her face was red, her eyes puffy from crying. Before I could even ask what was wrong, she shouted, "You ruined my life!" I blinked, trying to process what she was saying. "What are you talking about?" I asked, completely confused. She stomped towards me, pointing a trembling finger in my face. You've been sleeping with Jason. I know what you did." Jason, her husband. My stomach dropped. "What? Are you serious right now? That's insane." But Sarah wasn't listening. She was full-on hysterical, throwing accusations left and right. "Don't lie to me. I saw the texts. I know you've been sneaking around behind my back." I was stunned. Texts? Sneaking around? Jason and I had barely spoken outside of family gatherings. The idea that I was having an affair with him was so far out there, I couldn't even wrap my head around it. Before I could say anything else, my parents walked in. My mom took one look at Sarah and immediately rushed to her side. "Sarah, honey, what's going on?" Sarah turned to them, her voice shaky and filled with fake tears. "She's been sleeping with Jason. I caught them!" My mom gasped, covering her mouth, while my dad's face turned red. He stared at me with this cold, accusing look. "Is this true?" he asked. "No, of course not," I shot back, feeling a mix of panic and anger. "Sarah's making this up." But it didn't matter what I said. They were already convinced. My mom was shaking her head, muttering, "I can't believe this. I thought you were better than this." "Mom, listen to me," I pleaded. "I didn't do anything. Jason and I, there's nothing going on." Sarah, still playing the victim, clutched my mom's arm. "Don't believe her lies. She's been jealous of me for years. She wanted to ruin my marriage." "Jealous? Are you kidding me?" I couldn't help but laugh, even though nothing about this was funny. "You're the one who's always been jealous, Sarah. You've always tried to make me look bad." But my dad wasn't having it. "Enough," he snapped. "We're not going to stand here and listen to you deny it. Sarah wouldn't make this up." I felt like I was in a nightmare. How could they believe her without even asking for proof? Without even considering my side of the story? "Dad, please," I tried again. "Think about it. Why would I ever do something like that? Jason and I barely even talk." But my words were falling on deaf ears. My mom was crying now, and my dad just shook his head. "You've hurt this family enough," he said. "You need to leave." My heart stopped. "What?" "You heard me," he said firmly. "Pack your things and go." I was speechless. My own parents were kicking me out of the house, believing that I had an affair with my stepsister's husband, without a shred of evidence. It felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. I looked at Sarah, hoping for some sign of guilt, some indication that she'd realize how insane this was. But she just smirked, wiping away fake tears. She knew exactly what she was doing. I turned back to my parents, hoping they'd change their minds. "Please," I said, my voice breaking. "You're making a mistake." But they weren't budging. My mom wouldn't even look at me, and my dad just repeated, "Get out." I didn't have a choice. I went to my room, grabbed a few things, and left the house in a daze. My mind was spinning, my heart pounding. How did this happen? How did my life get turned upside down in a matter of minutes? As I walked down the street, the weight of what just happened hit me like a ton of bricks. My family, the people who were supposed to love and support me no matter what, had just thrown me out. All because of a lie. I found myself sitting on a bench at the park, staring at my phone, debating whether to call anyone. But who would believe me? My parents didn't. Sarah had everyone wrapped around her finger. I felt completely alone. The night air was cold, but I barely noticed. I was too numb, too lost in my thoughts. My whole life had been ripped apart, and I didn't know what to do next. All I knew was that I couldn't go back. Not until I found a way to prove my innocence. But how do you prove you didn't do something when everyone's already made up their minds? I sat there for hours, trying to make sense of everything. But no matter how much I thought about it, nothing made sense. All I knew was that Sarah had won, for now. And I was left to pick up the pieces of my shattered life. Walking away from my parents' house that night felt like stepping into a void. I wasn't just leaving behind a place. I was leaving behind everything I thought I could count on. My family had betrayed me, plain and simple. And the worst part? They didn't even care enough to hear me out. I kept replaying the scene in my head. Sarah's accusations, my parents' cold stares, the way they just accepted her lies without question. It made my blood boil. How could they? I had always been the one trying to keep the peace in our family, always the one overlooked while Sarah basked in the spotlight. And now, with no evidence, they turned their backs on me completely. The night was cold, and I had nowhere to go. I ended up wandering the streets for what felt like hours. The whole time, my mind was spinning. What did I do to deserve this? Why didn't my parents trust me? Was I that unimportant to them? Eventually, I found myself in front of Megan's apartment. She was my best friend, the one person I knew I could turn to. I knocked on her door, half expecting her to be asleep, but she opened it almost immediately. The look on her face when she saw me, red-eyed, clutching a bag of hastily packed clothes, was a mix of confusion and concern. "What happened?" she asked, pulling me inside. And that's when I lost it. The weight of everything crashed down on me, and I started sobbing. Between gasps for air, I tried to explain. "Sarah, she said she told my parents I was sleeping with Jason." Megan's eyes widened in shock. "What? That's crazy." "I know," I said, wiping my face. "But my parents, they believed her. They kicked me out." She pulled me into a tight hug, letting me cry it out. "I can't believe they'd do that," she said softly. "You didn't even get a chance to explain?" I shook my head. They didn't want to hear it. They just took her word for it. Megan let out a frustrated sigh. "That's not right. You don't deserve this." That night, I crashed on Megan's couch. I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sarah's smug face, my parents' disappointed glares. It felt like my whole world had been ripped apart, and I was left trying to pick up the pieces. The next morning, Megan made us coffee and sat down across from me. "Okay, so what's the plan?" she asked. I shrugged, staring into my cup. "I don't know. I guess I need to find a place to stay, figure out my next move." "You can stay here as long as you need," she said without hesitation. I was grateful, but I didn't want to impose. "Thanks, Meg. I really appreciate it, but I can't stay here forever. I need to figure things out." For the next few days, I stayed at her place while I tried to get my bearings. I started looking for apartments and applying for more jobs to save up, but the betrayal from my family hung over me like a dark cloud. Every time I thought about it, my chest tightened with a mix of anger and sadness. I tried reaching out to my parents a few times, hoping they'd at least hear me out. But every call went straight to voicemail. When I texted them, I got no response. It was like I didn't exist to them anymore, and that hurt more than anything. One day, out of desperation, I went back to the house. I stood on the porch debating whether to knock. When I finally did, my mom opened the door, her face cold and distant. "You shouldn't be here," she said flatly. "Mom, please," I begged. "Can we just talk? I didn't do what Sarah said. You have to believe me." She shook her head. "We've made our decision." "Mom, you're throwing me away for something I didn't do," I said, my voice breaking. "I'm your daughter." Her eyes flickered with something, guilt maybe, but it was gone in an instant. "You need to leave," she repeated. I stood there for a moment, hoping she'd change her mind, but she didn't. She just closed the door, leaving me standing there on the porch, feeling more alone than ever. As I walked away, I realized something. They weren't going to change their minds. They had chosen Sarah, and nothing I said or did would make a difference. It was a hard pill to swallow, but I knew I had to move on. Back at Megan's, I threw myself into finding a new place. I didn't have much saved, but I found a tiny studio apartment that I could afford. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Megan helped me move in, and even though it was small and kind of rundown, it felt good to have a space of my own. But the betrayal still lingered. Every night, as I lay on the mattress I borrowed from Megan, I thought about my parents. About how easily they discarded me. About how little they must have thought of me to believe Sarah's lies without a second thought. It was a wound that wouldn't heal, no matter how much I tried to focus on rebuilding my life. Megan was my rock through all of it. She kept me grounded, reminding me that I wasn't alone. "You're stronger than you think," she'd say. "You'll get through this." And I wanted to believe her. But every time I thought about my family, about the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, it felt like a knife twisting in my chest. How do you move on from that? How do you rebuild your life when the foundation has been ripped out from under you? I didn't have the answers, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't let Sarah's lies define me. I had to find a way to move forward, even if it felt impossible. And so, piece by piece, I started trying to put my life back together. Settling into my tiny apartment was weird at first. It wasn't much, just a single room with a bed in the corner, a small table, and a kitchenette that looked like it came straight out of a 90s sitcom. But it was mine, and after everything that had happened, having something of my own felt like a small victory. I didn't have much furniture, just the basics Megan helped me find. It was bare, almost depressing, but it was a start. The first few days were rough. I'd come home from work and just sit there, staring at the walls. The silence was deafening. Back when I lived with my parents, even on the quietest days, there was always some background noise, TV in the living room, my mom cooking, or Sarah's constant chatter. Now it was just me, and it felt empty. But as much as it sucked, I knew I couldn't let myself spiral. I had already lost my family. I wasn't about to lose myself too. So I started small. I made a list of things I needed to do. Unpack, get some basic groceries, maybe put up a few decorations to make the place feel less like a box and more like a home. The unpacking part was quick. I didn't have much, just a few clothes, some books, and the essentials Megan had given me when I first moved in. But getting groceries was an adventure. I had to budget carefully, stretching every dollar as far as it could go. I wasn't rolling in money, but I was determined to make it work. After a couple of trips to the thrift store, I found a few things to spruce up the place. A secondhand rug to cover the cold floor, a couple of cheap picture frames, and a plant that I was almost sure I'd kill within a week. Still, it made a difference. Slowly, my apartment started to feel less like a temporary shelter and more like a place I could actually live. Work became my escape. I threw myself into my job, picking up extra shifts whenever I could. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept my mind busy. I needed that. Every time I let my thoughts wander, they inevitably drifted back to my parents, to Sarah, and to the life I'd lost. Staying busy was the only way to keep those thoughts at bay. Megan checked in on me regularly, dragging me out for coffee or a walk when she thought I was getting too stuck in my own head. "You need to take a break," she'd say, forcing a cup of overpriced coffee into my hands. And honestly, those moments helped. It was a reminder that I wasn't completely alone, even if my family had abandoned me. One weekend, Megan convinced me to join her at a local farmer's market. It was one of those sunny days where the weather was too perfect to stay inside, and even though I wasn't in the mood, I went along. As we wandered through the stalls, something shifted. For the first time in weeks, I felt a tiny spark of happiness. It wasn't much, just a flicker, but it was there. We spent the afternoon laughing, talking about everything except the mess that had become my life. It was a break from the constant weight I carried around, and I realized how much I needed that. By the time we left, I felt lighter. Not completely okay, but better. That night, as I sat in my apartment looking at the small bouquet of flowers I'd impulsively bought at the market, I realized something. I was starting to rebuild. It wasn't a dramatic change, and it definitely wasn't fast, but little by little, I was picking up the pieces. The days turned into weeks, and the numbness I'd felt when I first moved in began to fade. I started to establish a routine. Wake up, go to work, come home, take care of the apartment, and repeat. It wasn't exciting, but it was steady, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I had some control over my life. One night, I decided to tackle a project I'd been avoiding, decorating the walls. It sounds silly, but putting up those old photos and a few posters I liked made a huge difference. It was like I was claiming the space as my own. Each picture, each small decoration was a reminder that this was my life now. Not the life I thought I'd have, but the one I was building. There were still hard days, though. Days where I'd wake up and feel the weight of everything pressing down on me. On those days, it was a struggle just to get out of bed. But I kept pushing forward, reminding myself that this was temporary. I wasn't going to be stuck in that dark place forever. I started journaling again, something I hadn't done since I was a teenager. It helped to get my thoughts out, to put them down on paper where they felt less overwhelming. I wrote about everything: my anger at Sarah, my disappointment in my parents, my fears about the future. It wasn't a magic cure, but it helped me process everything in a way that felt manageable. One entry stands out even now. "I don't know what tomorrow holds, but I'm still here. I'm still fighting. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough." As the weeks turned into months, I found myself slowly letting go of the anger. Not entirely, but enough to stop it from consuming me. I started focusing on what I could control: my job, my apartment, my future, and while the pain of losing my family never completely went away, it became a part of my story rather than the whole thing. Picking up the pieces wasn't easy, and there were days when it felt like I was moving backward instead of forward. But with each small step, each tiny victory, I began to see a future that didn't revolve around what I'd lost, but what I could build for myself. And that was something worth holding on to. Months had passed since I'd moved into my tiny apartment. Life was still far from perfect, but I had found a rhythm. Work kept me busy, and Megan's constant support reminded me I wasn't completely alone. Still, the ache of being cut off by my family never really went away. No matter how much I tried to focus on the future, I couldn't forget the way they tossed me aside, believing Sarah's lies without question. Then, one evening, everything changed. I was sitting on my couch after work, mindlessly scrolling through my phone, when I noticed an email notification. The sender's name didn't ring any bells, but the subject line stopped me cold. "You deserve to know the truth." My heart started pounding. I hesitated for a second, wondering if it was some kind of scam, but something told me to open it. The moment I did, my breath caught in my throat. It was from Jason. Sarah's Jason. Her husband. The one she had accused me of sleeping with. The email started off simple. "Hey, I know this is probably unexpected, but I need to clear the air. I've been holding on to this for too long, and it's time you know the truth." I felt a mix of emotions: confusion, anger, and a weird kind of hope. Why now? Why after all this time? I kept reading, my hands trembling as Jason laid everything out. "Sarah lied," he wrote. "I know she accused you of having an affair with me, but none of it was true. The truth is, Sarah was the one cheating." I blinked, reading that line over and over. Could this really be happening? Jason went on to explain everything. Sarah had been seeing someone else, a guy from her office. When Jason found out, she panicked and came up with a story to cover her tracks. That story? Blaming me for something I didn't do. She figured it would be easier to throw me under the bus than admit her own mistakes. "I should have spoken up sooner," Jason admitted. "But at the time I was too angry and too hurt. I let Sarah's lies take over, and for that, I'm sorry." Attached to the email were screenshots, texts between Sarah and her co-worker, emails they'd exchanged, even photos of them together. It was all there, undeniable proof that she had been lying from the start. I stared at my screen, a whirlwind of emotions crashing over me. Relief, anger, sadness. It was all hitting me at once. After all this time, after all the pain and betrayal, the truth was finally out. Jason ended the email with a simple note. "I hope this helps. I'm sorry for everything you've been through because of us." I didn't know what to feel. Part of me was relieved that the truth was finally out, that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't the person my family had made me out to be. But another part of me was furious. Furious at Jason for staying silent for so long. Furious at Sarah for her lies, and furious at my parents for believing her without a second thought. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the email, my mind racing. What was I supposed to do now? Should I confront my parents? Should I reach out to Sarah? The proof was right there in front of me, but I wasn't sure if it would make any difference. Would they even believe me now? I forwarded the email to Megan. Within minutes, my phone buzzed. It was her. "Holy crap," she said the moment I picked up. "Are you okay?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I mean, I'm glad I finally know the truth, but it's a lot." Megan didn't push me to talk more. She just listened as I vented, letting me process everything in my own time. After we hung up, I sat in silence, trying to figure out my next move. I couldn't just sit on this information. My family needed to know the truth, even if it wouldn't magically fix everything. They needed to see the proof, to understand how wrong they had been. But part of me was scared. Scared of facing them. Scared of how they would react. The thought of walking back into their lives after everything they'd done was daunting. But I knew I couldn't keep living under the shadow of Sarah's lies. I needed closure, and the only way to get that was to confront them with the truth. I spent the rest of the night going through the screenshots, preparing myself for the conversation that needed to happen. Every text, every email was a reminder of how easily Sarah had lied, how easily my family had believed her. And now, it was time to finally set the record straight. As I closed my laptop and got ready for bed, I felt a strange mix of emotions. The truth was finally out there, but it wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where I would take back control of my narrative. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. I didn't know how things would play out, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let Sarah's lies define me any longer. The truth was on my side now, and it was time to face it head on. After reading Jason's email, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't sit on this information. My family needed to know the truth, even if it meant opening old wounds. The thought of confronting them was terrifying, but I couldn't keep living under the weight of Sarah's lies. They had to see the proof and understand what they'd done to me. The next morning, I woke up feeling anxious but determined. I spent hours going over the screenshots, rehearsing what I would say, trying to prepare myself for every possible reaction. By afternoon, I decided it was time. I grabbed my phone, took a deep breath, and called my mom. She picked up after a few rings. "Hello?" Her voice was cautious, like she wasn't sure why I was calling. "Mom, it's me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need to talk to you and Dad. It's important." There was a pause. "What is this about?" she asked, her tone still guarded. "It's about Sarah," I replied. "And what she told you about me and Jason. I have proof that she lied." Another pause, longer this time. "Okay," she finally said. "Come over." The drive to their house felt surreal. I hadn't been back since the night they kicked me out. Every street, every corner reminded me of the life I used to have. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my heart was pounding. I sat in the car for a moment, trying to calm my nerves. Then I grabbed my phone and the printouts I'd made of Jason's email and the screenshots and headed to the door. My mom opened it before I could knock. She looked older, more tired than I remembered. Without a word, she stepped aside to let me in. My dad was sitting in the living room, his expression unreadable. Sarah wasn't there, and I was grateful for that. I wasn't ready to face her yet. I sat down across from them, my hands shaking slightly as I pulled out the papers. "I need you to read this," I said, handing them over. My mom took the papers, and my dad leaned in to read over her shoulder. The room was silent, except for the sound of paper rustling. As they read, I watched their faces closely. My mom's eyes widened and my dad's jaw tightened. They didn't say anything until they finished. "This is from Jason?" my dad finally asked, his voice low. I nodded. "He sent me an email apologizing for everything. Sarah was the one cheating, not me. She lied to cover her tracks, and you believed her without question." My mom's hands trembled as she set the papers down. We didn't know," she whispered. "No," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "You didn't want to know. It was easier to believe her and blame me than to face the truth." My dad looked away, his face red with what I could only hope was shame. "We thought we were doing the right thing," he muttered. "The right thing?" I repeated, my anger bubbling to the surface. "You threw me out of the house without even listening to my side. You didn't just take Sarah's word. You destroyed my life based on her lies." My mom reached out, her eyes pleading. "We're sorry," she said, her voice cracking. "We didn't know what else to do." I pulled my hand away, shaking my head. "It's too late for that," I said. "Your apology doesn't change what happened. I lost everything because of you. My home, my family, my peace of mind." "We want to make it right," my dad said, his voice firm but soft. "We know we made a mistake." I stood up, unable to sit there any longer. "A mistake?" I said, my voice rising. "This wasn't just a mistake. You chose to believe a lie and threw me away like I didn't matter. And now you want to make it right?" They didn't have an answer. My mom just sat there, tears streaming down her face, while my dad stared at the floor. "I'm not here to make you feel better," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. "I'm here because I needed you to know the truth. I needed you to see the damage you caused." "We know," my mom whispered. "We know we hurt you." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you," I admitted, "but at least now you know the truth." With that, I turned and walked out of the house. My heart was pounding, my hands shaking, but I felt a strange sense of relief. The truth was out, and they couldn't deny it anymore. They finally knew the pain they had caused, and it was up to them to live with that. As I got into my car and drove away, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't complete closure, but it was a step in the right direction. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had taken back a piece of my life. And that was enough for now. Driving away from my parents' house after confronting them was surreal. I felt like I was leaving behind more than just their home. I was leaving behind years of anger, hurt, and betrayal. The truth was finally out, and they knew they had been wrong. But knowing and fixing things are two very different things. For days after, I kept replaying the confrontation in my head. My parents' faces when they read Jason's email, the silence that hung in the room after I laid everything out. It was all so vivid. They apologized, sure, but apologies don't erase the years I spent feeling like an outsider, like I was the villain in a story I didn't even write. Megan, of course, was right there when I got home. She'd been my rock through all of this, and when I walked in, she immediately asked, "How'd it go?" I shrugged, dropping my bag on the floor. They know the truth now. They apologized, but it doesn't really change anything. She nodded, offering a small smile. "At least it's out there now. That's got to feel a little better, right?" I sat down on the couch, letting out a long sigh. "It does, I guess, but it's like, I don't know how to feel. I've wanted this for so long, for them to see the truth, but now that they do, it's just weird." Megan sat beside me, her hand on my shoulder. "Closure is messy," she said. "It's not this neat little package where everything just feels better all of a sudden." She was right, of course. Closure isn't about tying things up with a neat little bow. It's about finding peace in the middle of the mess. And that's what I was trying to do, find some kind of peace. In the days that followed, my parents tried reaching out. I got texts from my mom almost daily, asking if we could talk more, if I'd come over for dinner, if we could start over. My dad even left a voicemail, something he rarely did. His voice was strained, like he didn't know what to say but felt like he had to say something. "We're really sorry, sweetheart. We just want to make things right." But the thing is, I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready to pretend everything was okay, to sit down at the dinner table and act like the past few years hadn't happened. Their betrayal cut deep, and while knowing the truth helped, it didn't erase the pain. I responded to my mom's text with short, polite replies. I told her I needed time, and thankfully she respected that. For once, she wasn't pushing, wasn't trying to guilt me into forgiving them on her timeline. That small mercy gave me the space I needed to think. One evening, I decided to go for a walk. The weather was nice, and I needed to clear my head. As I walked through the park, I thought about everything I'd been through, being kicked out, struggling to find my footing, the constant ache of losing my family. And now, standing on the other side of it all, I realized something important. I had survived. I had made it through one of the hardest, most painful experiences of my life. And I was still standing. Sure, I had scars, but I wasn't broken. I had rebuilt my life, found strength I didn't know I had, and proved to myself that I could survive even the worst kind of betrayal. As I stood there watching the sunset, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. It wasn't a perfect peace. It wasn't like everything was suddenly okay, but it was enough. Enough to remind me that I didn't need my parents' validation or their constant apologies to move forward. I could find closure on my own terms. When I got back home, I decided to write a letter. Not an email or a text, but a real handwritten letter. There was something about putting pen to paper that felt more honest, more final. I sat down at my small table and started writing. Dear Mom and Dad, I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened, about the lies, the betrayal, and now the truth. I know you're sorry, and I appreciate that. But I need you to understand that this isn't something that can be fixed overnight. The pain I've carried doesn't just go away because you've apologized. I need time. Time to process, time to heal, and time to figure out what a relationship with you might look like in the future. I'm not saying I'll never forgive you, but I'm not there yet. I hope you can understand that. For now, I need space. I need to focus on myself and my life. Please respect that. When I'm ready, I'll reach out. Until then, take care. Love, my name. Writing that letter felt like a weight had been lifted. It wasn't about cutting them off forever. It was about setting boundaries and taking control of my healing process. I slipped the letter into an envelope, addressed it, and mailed it the next day. After that, I didn't hear from them for a while. They respected my request for space, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. Update. After the confrontation with my parents, I thought that was it. I had said my piece, and I figured life would move on slowly but surely. But as it turns out, karma had other plans for Sarah, and honestly, I can't say I felt bad about it. It started small. A few weeks after I walked out of my parents' house, I got a call from Megan. "You won't believe what I just heard," she said, barely able to contain her excitement. "What's up?" I asked, curious. "Apparently, Sarah's social circle is starting to crumble," Megan said. "One of my coworkers knows her from some mutual friends, and word's getting around about what she did." I felt a small spark of satisfaction. "What exactly are they saying?" "They're talking about how she cheated on Jason and then blamed you for it. People are starting to see through her lies." I couldn't help but smile. It seemed like people were finally seeing the real Sarah. Over the next few weeks, more and more stories started trickling in. Megan would fill me in on the gossip she heard, and it was clear Sarah's reputation was taking a hit. Friends who once admired her were now keeping their distance. People who used to hang out with her regularly stopped inviting her to events. It was like she was being slowly cut off from the social world she once ruled. Then came the news I didn't expect. One evening, my phone buzzed, and it was a text from my mom. "We need to talk. Can you come over?" I debated whether to respond, but curiosity got the better of me. When I arrived at their house, my mom looked worn out, like she hadn't slept in days. My dad was sitting in the living room, his expression as hard as ever. "We kicked Sarah out," my mom said, getting straight to the point. I blinked, taken aback. "What? Why?" "She's been causing more problems than we can handle," my dad said, his voice gruff. "After everything came out about her lies, she's been lashing out at us, blaming us for her mess. We've had enough." I wasn't sure how to feel. Part of me was glad. They were finally seeing what I'd known all along. But another part of me couldn't believe it had come to this. What did she do? I asked, my curiosity piqued. She's been throwing tantrums, refusing to take responsibility for anything, my mom explained. After you left, things got worse. She started causing scenes at home, and when her friends started dropping her, she took it out on us. My dad shook his head. We couldn't deal with it anymore. She's gone too far. I leaned back, processing what they were saying. So, where is she now? We don't know, my mom admitted. She left last week, and we haven't heard from her since. I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of emotions. Sarah had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. And now, here they were, finally seeing her for who she really was. It was both satisfying and sad. She's reaping what she sowed, my dad added. And honestly, we can't fix it for her this time. For the first time, I saw a glimpse of regret in their eyes. Not just for kicking Sarah out, but for the way they had treated me. After that, I didn't hear much about Sarah for a while. But then, one day, I ran into an old friend from high school who happened to know her. Hey, she said, pulling me aside. Have you heard about Sarah? Not really, I admitted. What's going on? She's pretty much alone now, she said. Her friends have all ditched her. No one wants to be around someone who lies like that. I nodded, not surprised. Sounds about right. She's trying to reach out to people, but no one's responding. Last I heard, she's staying with some distant relative out of town, trying to start over. Hearing that should have made me feel triumphant, but it didn't. Instead, it felt hollow. Sarah had dug her own grave, and now she was lying in it. I didn't feel sorry for her, but I didn't feel as satisfied as I thought I would either. Later that night, as I sat in my apartment, I reflected on everything that had happened. Sarah's downfall was her own doing. Her lies, her manipulation, they had all come back to bite her. And now, she was paying the price. My parents had kicked her out, her friends had abandoned her, and she was left to fend for herself. It was the kind of poetic justice I never thought I'd see. But more than that, it was a reminder that actions have consequences. Sarah's life had fallen apart, and while I wasn't the one to bring her down, watching karma do its thing was enough. I didn't need to get my hands dirty. Life had a way of balancing the scales all on its own. In the end, I realized something important. I didn't need revenge to move on. The truth had come out, and Sarah was facing the consequences of her actions. That was enough for me. I had my own life to live, and I wasn't going to waste any more energy on her or the past. Closure wasn't about getting even, it was about letting go. And that's exactly what I plan to do.